Well, I don't know about you, but I'm still kind of trying to celebrate its New Year's. It's like 11 days in, and I'm like, it just is hard to believe we're in a new year, but here we are. And in this new year, we're resuming our series on the book of Genesis. We paused the Genesis sermon series back just before Thanksgiving, and my guess is that very few of you remember anything about what chapter we were in. Maybe even few of you remember anything about the story of Genesis. I don't know. We've been going through it for a long time. I mean, listen, you probably remember about Adam and Eve and the flood, and maybe even Abraham, but I don't know how much more you probably do. So, but don't worry, I'm not giving you a pop quiz today, not that. But I am going to give you a little overview of what has happened in Genesis up till now, because we are in chapter 40, so a lot has taken place. But I want to just kind of give you a little bit of overview of some things. And for me, it's easy to look at Genesis in three major parts. And in the first part was what I call the creation story. Of course, God created the universe and the stars and the planets and the sun, and then he created heaven on earth, a place called Eden. And in Eden, he created Adam and Eve. And of course, they sinned. Didn't take them long. They were pretty quick to that. And then when they sinned, evil came into the world. We went from this beautiful heaven on earth to a fractured earth. And that evil that came in became so bad that finally in chapter 11, God sent a flood, because the evil was all everywhere and it was throughout. And so he decided it was time to kind of start over, if you will, and he started over with a guy named Noah. So that ended part one, and then we took a little break, and then we came back, and part two started in chapter 12 and went through chapter 24, and it was all about Abraham and Sarah. And the big important thing, I mean, they had a lot of chapters for them, and the big important thing there was that God made a promise that he would build a great nation from them. In other words, when he just left the earth to kind of let it roam on its own, we saw what happened. A flood had to happen. But this time he says, I'm going to create a nation that is going to be my nation, my chosen people. You're going to be, the nation of Israel is going to be the country that is going to represent God to the world and the world to God. So he created that. By the way, that responsibility has been handed to the church. And so we now have that responsibility, but that's a whole other story. But nevertheless, so we went through 12 through chapter 24, and of course that great nation would bless the world, and because they would be his people. Now, eventually, the other great thing that came from that people group, is he sent a Messiah in through them. And of course, we just finished celebrating the birth of the Messiah, the coming of the Messiah, aka Jesus, with Christmas. And I just want to real quickly jump a little ahead to Matthew 1, because, I mean, some of you may not know this, but I think it's in there. Matthew 1, starting in verse 1. Yeah, there we go. You may not know this, but now that we've gone through Genesis, maybe this will mean a little bit more to you, because look at all the names you might recognize. It says, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. We saw Isaac. Isaac, the father of Jacob. Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah, which we have not gotten to very much. We've talked a little bit about him, but we haven't gotten to the part of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, although you might remember Tamar, and Perez, the father of Hezron. I think it's pretty cool that when you have gone through Genesis and you go through the Old Testament, you start seeing some of the names that were in the family tree of Jesus, and you can recognize them. And of course, Abraham was so important that it took chapter 11 to chapter 24 to get to his grandson Jacob, and that's where part 2 ended, and part 3, the way I divide it up anyway, part 3 of Genesis starts with Jacob, and it starts in really 24, 25, and it is the story of God building his people into the nation of Israel. You see, Jacob, and we've already covered this, was later named, Jacob in this part, was later named Israel. And so he had 12 sons, and they later became the 12 tribes of Israel. That formed the basis of this nation. So up to this point, it was just a handful of people. But now it's going to begin to take a little bit more, it's going to, take root into starting to become this nation. By the way, in verse 2, you see that Judah was the son of Jacob that is the godly line, the one where the seed of the Messiah was being passed and carried on. And so Judah was very big. But what's interesting, at this part of Genesis, we're in a story about Jacob's other son named Joseph. And a lot of people, if you ask them, would say, well, I know Joseph a lot more than I know Judah, because he's represented and he is a big figure in it. You would think that the seed of the Messiah would come through him. It didn't. It went through Judah. And we'll get to Judah at some point. Actually, we'll talk about him next week. But anyway, the reason that he is the only son mentioned here, though, is because of that. So, but Jacob's son Joseph now is who we're going to sort of be focused on, and we have been really since Genesis 37. Now, you may recall that every other person since Abraham, including Abraham, had serious character flaws. I think that's just the easy way to say it. They lied, they had affairs, they were polygamous, and many other bad things that was in that family tree, right? I mean, you're like, this is the godly line, and this is who we're here to look up to or whatever. Not necessarily their behavior, and not necessarily their character, not in all cases. They had faith, and that was what made them distinguished, but they still had problems. But here comes Joseph, and he's Jacob's favorite son, and he is finally somebody that we actually can look up to. Joseph is this guy that when you get to him and you're like, all right, what's he going to do? How's he going to stumble? Where is he going to fall down? All of that's going to, is going to be pushed aside, because now Joseph is here, and Joseph is a very godly man, and so we can take a lot from him, and that's one of the reasons why this is focused on him. So the last sermon on Genesis was about Joseph getting propositioned by his boss's wife. You may remember that was in chapter 39. But being the godly man that Joseph was, he declined her advances. Now, she didn't like that. She was expecting him to respond and to her way and so forth, but he didn't. And so she lied to her husband and said that he was the one that tried to seduce her, that it was all him coming after her and stuff. And of course, his boss got angry. His boss is number 2 guy in Egypt. He got angry and threw Joseph into prison. You talk about, just bad fortune, right? He was on this crazy roller coaster, right, through life. If you remember, Joseph's brothers had sold him into slavery, so he got shipped off, but then he had the fortunate, he got into being with the number 2 guy, Potiphar, and got raised up and was, in charge of things. Now he gets wrongly accused and he's thrown into prison. But nevertheless, one of my favorite lines in the Bible, really, gets repeated time and time again. And this is from chapter 39. We'll just do this and then we're ready to get into 40. Verse 20 says that, but while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. Listen, it's easy to think that if God was with Joseph, that he wouldn't be in prison, right? It's like, wait a minute, if God's with you, you're rescuing him. You're keeping him from that. Those are the stories we like to see, right? He was a godly man, and God rescued him and all that kind of stuff. But the truth is that God did not put him in prison, but he was with him in prison. And this is the recurring truth of Joseph's life, because what's going to happen is we see time and time again how God uses these kinds of situations for his glory. And so that's what we have to always keep in mind. And thankfully, Joseph somehow knew that. Okay, so that brings us up to where we are in Genesis. If you have a Bible, or the sermon notes, go ahead. We're going to be in chapter 40, and we're going to pick up in verse 1, and it says this. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. Now, for starters, we're going to go fairly quickly through this chapter because it is just setting really the stage for chapter 41. But that said, it's pretty clear that the two key members of Pharaoh's staff have messed up, right? One is a baker, and everybody knows what a baker is. But the second one's a cupbearer, and that's something we're not very familiar with today. But a cupbearer was a person who was very trusted and stuff, but they were the ones that were put in charge of tasting the wine before the king drank it to make sure it wasn't poisoned. So it's quite a job. I mean, apparently back then it was kind of common to kill the king by poisoning the wine because we see cupbearers a lot in Scripture and stuff. And listen, I mean, on one hand, it's a really good job, right? I mean, you're just tasting wine. Like, hey, all right, let's taste this. But it's only good up until the time that maybe poison's in the wine. And then I think I would have hired an assistant if it was me and had the assistant take the first sip. But anyway, that's just me. I mean, he was a very important person, so he could probably hired somebody to do that. All right. Anyway, a famous Bible character, by the way, named Nehemiah was the cupbearer for many years. If you didn't know that, there's your little trivia for you. Okay. So both of these guys get thrown into prison under the prison warden's right-hand man, who is Joseph. Joseph's in prison, but the warden kind of trusts him to be sort of running the show and stuff, which is kind of cool. So now, for the next several verses, we learn that both of these guys had dreams that they didn't understand. So the good news, and as you'll see, the bad news is that Joseph had a gift for interpreting dreams, or he'll tell you what that gift is. But check out what Joseph said. In fact, here he says it. This is why he was able to interpret dreams. In verse 8, it says, interpreting dreams is God's business, Joseph replied. Go ahead and tell me your dreams. But it's God who's going to be the one doing the interpreting, is going to be speaking through him. But listen, here's something, just a little side note on this. Not all dreams are from God, but when they are, it's his business to reveal the interpretation. And listen, if you have a dream that you remember, now I know a lot of us are like me, you have a dream and then like, what was that about? But if you have a dream and you remember it, especially if it's something that is recurring and you know you have had multiple times, then I think it's really important to stop, even write it down. But I would encourage you to share it with those believers that are in your life, in your small group, or you can contact me or whatever, and we'll take a time just to pray for God to reveal that interpretation of what that prayer is. And I've been fortunate enough to have had some prayers in my life, but I've also been fortunate enough to talk to others who've had prayers, and it's really cool when God speaks to you through prayer. So just take that as a side note. All right, so this is what he told the cupbearer in verse 12. This is what Joseph told him. He said, this is what it means, Joseph said to him. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. So, good news for the cupbearer. Joseph interpreted his dream. We didn't go through his dream. You'll have to go back and look at it, but it's sort of outlined here. But Joseph interpreted his dream to mean that he would be restored to his position. So really good news for the cupbearer. And with that news, the baker wanted to know about his dream. So verse 16, when the chief baker saw that Joseph had given the favorable interpretation, he said, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread, and in the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what this means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole. Have a good day. So Joseph is a straight shooter, right? I mean, he's not holding back. He's like, this is what God says. I'm just telling you like it is. And he gives them this bad news. So let's check out what happens in verse 20. It says, now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, which is kind of interesting that he's celebrating his birthday in this way, but let's just keep going. And he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, but he impaled the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. So good news for the cupbearer, just as Joseph had said. Bad news for the baker, just as Joseph had said. But it's also bad news for Joseph, right? Because the cupbearer had ghosted him. I mean, it's like, come on, dude. I gave you this great news and everything, and he disappears and stuff. I mean, how crazy is that that would happen to him? But again, remember, the story is just a setup for what's to come in chapter 41. All right, keep moving on to chapter 41. Verse 1 says this. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river there came 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside them on the riverbank. And the cows were ugly and gaunt, the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. And then Pharaoh woke up. So 2 years passed, long time, right? He's in prison. The guy, cupbearer, still doesn't remember him, all that kind of stuff. And now Pharaoh all of a sudden has this dream that is very, very troubling to him. But then this happened. Verse 5. He fell asleep again, Pharaoh that is, and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. Again, it had been a dream. So in consecutive nights, Pharaoh has 2 very distinct dreams. And so he's in charge, right? He's the king. And so he does what a king would do. He says, I'm going to get together the best I can. And here he does in verse 8. In the morning, his mind was troubled. So he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Well. All the magicians and all the wise men in Egypt were stumped, right? They couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And so they're like lost in this kind of stuff. But then this happens. Verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Isn't that interesting? It's been 2+ years, and all of a sudden, he remembers something. He says, when you were angry with us, you imprisoned me and the chief baker. Each of us had a dream, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now, a young Hebrew was there with us. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. You remember that, Pharaoh? You remember when you did that? He said, this all took place. So the forgetful cupbearer all of a sudden remembered Joseph. Thank you, Jesus, right, for reminding the cupbearer that of this memory that took place before. And so now you understand, because now it all starts to come together, why chapter 40 had to happen, why those dreams took place. If they hadn't have happened, right, none of this would have been called on, or he would not have been called. But you see, by interpreting the dreams of the cupbearer, Joseph had set up an encounter with the Pharaoh. And so that's what's so beautiful. Actually, God set it up, but Joseph was now able to do that. And so, again, isn't it amazing how God orchestrates his plan by using evil of this world? But he does it all the time. I mean, he's constantly, there's a lot of evil in this world, and he's constantly orchestrating it so that it completes his plan that he has. And that's what's such a wonderful, beautiful thing. I mean, if you go back through the history of the Christian church since Christ, there have been so many attempts to just abolish it throughout centuries and stuff, and yet look at it now, thriving. Not as much as we'd like. We get kind of down because we see a part of it, but I'm telling you, it's the largest faith in the world for a reason. And it's because God has been orchestrating it even through all of that. But we could go through so many other things where he has done this and stuff, but he does it all the time. All right. And again, come back next week. We'll talk about it even more because it really kind of comes to a head then. But all right, verse 14. Seems like I'm putting a lot of promos in for next week, like you're not coming. And so maybe that'll prompt you to come. I don't know. Anyway, so Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph said, I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Okay, first of all, shaving was a very non-Hebrew thing to do, so it's kind of interesting that he would take that step. But in no uncertain times, this is really the important thing. In no uncertain terms, Joseph made it clear that he could do nothing. He's like, no, it's not me. I'm not some wizard. I'm not some whatever. That's not what, I'm not that way. But that God not only could interpret his dream, but that he would interpret his dreams. Verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, your dreams are one and the same. God has revealed, so he told him to Joseph, I skipped over that. So he told him the exact same thing that we've read before. He says, your dreams are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. So the dreams are a prophecy of what is going to happen soon. He says he's got 7 years back to back that's going to take place. And even though Pharaoh is an evil ruler, God is gracious to him through his servant Joseph. And Joseph said this, verse 28. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Now let Pharaoh look for a wise man to put in charge, hint, hint, to collect all the food of the good years that are coming and store up the grain to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be used during the 7 years of famine so the country may not be ruined by the famine. Wow. Now, not only did God give Joseph the prophecy of what was coming, but he also gave Joseph wisdom for what needed to be done with the knowledge that this was happening, right? For someone to manage the abundance so that there would be food available during the famine was a suggestion that he was making. He's like, you need to find somebody that can do this for you. Maybe me? I don't know. But guess what happens next? Verse 37. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all of his officials, so Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Now, I love that. We'll come back to it in a moment, but man, I love that phrase. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Don't you just love it when an ungodly person sees someone in whom is the Spirit of God? That the Spirit of God is so bright and shining. It's like, I don't know what it is, but there's something different about you. I don't know if anybody's ever said that to you, but it's a beautiful thing when they do. Because there's something about God in you that should shine out. So anyway, let's back to Joseph. The roller coaster ride goes on, right? And he's on the upside again. Joseph becomes the number 2 man in charge of Egypt. He's actually higher than the guy that he was working for who threw him in prison. He's Potiphar. So he's now the number 2 guy in charge. And he says, the only thing, only with respect to the throne, will I be greater than you, is what Pharaoh told him. Man, you talking about giving a blank check to somebody. This is like, you go, man. You do it. Check this out. Verse 42. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. Ooh. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zabaphath Paneah. That's always fun to say. By the way, we still refer to him as Joseph because that's not a fun word to say. But anyway, he also gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife. So Joseph goes from living in the dungeon to wearing the signet ring, which is the ring that back then it was his seal. It was like, this is the ultimate thing that was authority, the signet ring. He dressed him in robes of fine linen, put a gold chain around him. He's like smiling, big gold chain. And then he's got a chariot, like, man, what a sweet hookup this is. Second in command is quite a promotion. Plus, he got a wife as well. So life is good for Joseph. Life is really taking a turn for the better. Verse 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh and said, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. Then the second son was named Ephraim, and said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. So from here on, everything went according to plan. And in the next chapter, like I said, we're going to connect some more dots to all of the story and stuff. And so I think it's just been really amazing how we have seen Joseph go through this incredible roller coaster in the ups of the highest of ups and the lowest of downs, right? I mean, going from being in a dungeon to being second in command with your own chariot. That's pretty sweet, So I think that's incredible. But one thing that I want to really point out before we end, because this is really the narrative of it. All the things that he talked about in the prophecy are going to come true. It's really amazing how that happened. And like I said, in the next chapter, 42, we're going to see even more of that unfold before us. But what I want to talk about before we close out today is something I think we can learn from Joseph that affects all of us, I think, at some point. I know it affects me, but I think it affects all of us at some point. And I want you to check out the meaning of the names of the sons to begin with. And it's because of God, right? It is because of God. It's because God has, and then the second son is because God. You see, Joseph had this incredible relationship with God. And the reality of Joseph's life is that there, even through the ups and downs on the roller coaster, he still maintained this incredible relationship with God. He had this incredible connection with God. But when you look at all the things he went through, getting sold into slavery, being thrown in the dungeon, all that kind of stuff that happened to him, If it had been me, I think I'd have been discouraged, to say the least. I mean, I think I'd be like, God, why? You're with me. Why does this happen? And I mean, so if anyone had a reason to be discouraged in his life, it was Joseph. But other than that time when he had a little bit to say to the chief chef about, remembering me, I've been in prison wrongly and that kind of stuff. There really is no other evidence that he ever complained about his situation. He maintained this upbeat, positive attitude. I mean, think about when he gets thrown into prison, he was doing so well that the warden put him in charge of the other prisoners. If he'd have just been bemoaning his situation and been over there, this is wrong, I need to be out, and somebody protest, and all this kind of stuff, it wasn't happening, right? Because he was seen as somebody who would fulfill whatever was the need at the time. But listen, he just never complained. And like many people who get thrown a curveball in life, he also didn't get mad at God. How many times are we like, God, if you really express your feelings, you're angry at God, right? Why did you let this happen to me? Why is this going on in my life? And so we have these acts of discouragement, right? These times of discouragement in our life where things happen and stuff to bring us to this point of being really down and not sure where to turn and stuff. Now, a couple weeks ago, if you were here, my sermon was on a challenge really for us to trust God more in 2026. To me, that's one of the things that I think is so critical to us in our faith, is that we can look and say, am I really trusting God in this situation? Just like Joseph, he's thrown into prison, he's sold into slavery. I'm trusting God. Even though in the midst of this terrible thing that's happened, I'm going to trust you, God, right? And so a couple weeks ago, I did not necessarily do it to set this up, but I was just like, this is what I'm talking about. When you trust God the way that Joseph trusted God, you don't get nearly as discouraged by the things that are happening, because you know that God is in control. You know He is sovereign. And in fact, when we get discouraged, you know what happens? We really are not trusting God. It's really saying, well, God, obviously you went to sleep on me here, and this thing happened while you were not looking, and so I'll just go ahead and take my lumps or whatever and be down and all that. But listen, God wants us to trust Him even in those difficult moments, that regardless of what your circumstances are, that we'll grow in trusting God more. I have a little passage from Romans 15:4 that I did not use back then but could have. And this is Paul writing, and he says, that we might have hope through perseverance in the encouragement of the Scriptures. See, to trust God like Joseph trusted Him, you have to have this relationship with God. And that happens through perseverance and the encouragement of the Scriptures. One of the things that we went through back over the summer, the Psalms and stuff, it is so important to have Scriptures, and Psalms are a great place to go that you can fall back into when those times of the circumstances happen that could lead you to discouragement, to draw you closer to God, to keep you in front of Him, to remind you that He is trustworthy even in the worst of situations. Even when things aren't laying out the way you wanted them to lay out. You prayed for it to go this and do that and stuff, and it went the opposite direction. And He says, I want you to trust me. Just like Joseph trusted me. Just like Paul trusted me. And have the encouragement of Scripture there for you. It also is important to have the encouragement of other believers in your life. It's one of the big reasons that I ask you and encourage you to get in small groups so you can get to know other believers and have this relationship with them, that you can share with one another what is taking place in your life, that you could lift each other up and encourage one another and stuff. I'm very thankful. I mean, I'll just throw this out. I'm so thankful that many of you encourage me. And I don't tell you enough how much I appreciate the encouragement that I get. And I really hope and pray that I encourage you as well. Because I think it's so important that in our life we have that kind of support for one another, that we are there to encourage one another. Some of you are gifted in this area. Some of you, have a gift, and it's great. Use that gift. But listen, as with every gift, if you have the gift of evangelism, that's wonderful. Evangelize. But it doesn't mean that you don't share Jesus if you don't have the gift of evangelism. It's still all of our responsibility. But the same thing's true with encouragement. If you have the gift, use that gift. But if you don't, it doesn't mean you can't encourage people. We have to remember how important it is for us to take that step out of doing what God has laid on our heart and stuff. And so, listen, God is trustworthy. God is trustworthy. Both when we're on the upside of the roller coaster and on the downside of the roller coaster. And listen, if you're on the downside today, I'm about to pray as we end the service, but I'm going to pray for you. And I'm going to pray God's blessing over you. And I hope that you'll look to God and His Scriptures and to those people that you know in your life, whether it's me or somebody else, because that's going to be so important as we go into this new year. God is trustworthy. Let's pray.